Wizards, Necromancer Extraordinaire. Welcome to the Wizard's Manse. Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to the Wizard's Manse. This is I, Goldretz, Necromancer Extraordinaire, at your service. Dungeons & Dragons has had 5 editions in the long tenure of almost 40 years, well, I think it's over 40 years at this point, that it's been around. Today, I want to talk about a specific edition that is advanced. Dungeons & Dragons. So this was so I curate Uber Demon's collection around the house. So this is the edition that he started in. We have aspirations to get older copies of the game down the road, as well as other grails and artifacts of tabletop gaming, especially in the fantasy genre, as we continue to proceed down this path. And again, Patreon is live. There's a link in the description below, so please click on that if you're so inclined and you have some money that you would like to donate to the cause. But mostly right now we need non-ancient recording equipment. This is very old equipment we're recording on, and it'd be nice to update that so we can give you higher quality content than what we're churning out right now. So, as I said previously, this was the edition that Uber Demon started in, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. This is the very first, this isn't the actual copy, but this is the very first player's handbook that Uber Demon had when he started playing Dungeons & Dragons. So, this is the only book from the 2nd edition of these covers that I have. Again, we're trying to hunt down a Dungeon Mastery Guide from this particular 2nd edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But there are 2 covers of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I believe these are the 1st edition covers. Actually, these are higher numbers. I remember there being a reprint. I believe these are actually reprints, but you have the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there's great cover art by Jeff Easley on those. And what core trio set of books would be complete without the wonderful Monster Manual? So, I'm going to take a quick pause here, and we're going to look at these in slightly closer in depth here shortly. And here we are again, and we're going to look at the 2nd edition Player's Handbook first, since it's the only one we have in this printing of the books here. So we'll get these out of the way and move them off to the side somewhere. We have more room to look at this glorious book and this glorious artwork. Again, this cover art was done by Jeff Easley. He is one of my absolute favorite Dungeons & Dragons artists from this era. We're going to look at things at somewhat of an angle here. But the thing that I really, truly miss about the old D&D books is the advertisements in the front and back of the book for other ancillary products, adventure modules, campaign modules. And they came in rectangular boxes back in the day with all the add-ons and extra stuff, instead of the hardbound books that started coming out when Wizards of the Coast had bought TSR. So, one thing I want to talk about briefly before we move on, and we'll just look at this lovely cover art as we're discussing this. So, let's think about it this way. So, we all know, well, most of us know, that Dungeons & Dragons basically came about from miniature wargaming. So, the story goes somewhat like this. I may not have it completely correct, but so, you know, I wasn't there. I didn't live it, breathe it. But my understanding of what happened is Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and you know, their friends. They were miniature wargaming enthusiasts, and by that I mean historical battles. And so Gary and Dave and his friends, they're like, well, okay, what would happen if we introduced fantasy characters and monsters to all of this? So they came up with a rule system called Chainmail, which was designed for fantasy miniature battles. That then evolved into the concept of what if you were one of the soldiers or one of the characters in that battle, and what adventures would you go on? So a lot of people think it was Gary Gygax that thought that way initially. However, Sci-Fi did an interview in the 1990s, and Gary Gygax is a part of that, and he mentions he cites that Dave Arneson was the one that thought about, okay, what if we were one of these characters and what adventures could we go on? That kind of mentality. But it's a collective property together between Gary and Dave mostly, and some others as well. But Gary and Dave are the ones that get the most of the glory for inventing Dungeons and Dragons. So, going a step further, company in the UK, Games Workshop, they developed other kinds of board games, chess, backgammon, etc. Founded by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, who have gone on to do great things on their own, as well as found one of the greatest gaming companies in the world. So they okay, and they're one of the first people. Well, they have the exclusive rights to distribute Dungeons and Dragons in the United Kingdom. So they also invested in a miniature line called Citadel Miniatures, and the idea was mostly theater of the mind for Dungeons and Dragons, but you had miniature representations of your characters if you so chose, and you could play chainmail with the fantasy battle rules, but chainmail wasn't as well received as Dungeons and Dragons, so Dungeons and Dragons kind of fed the miniature market from what I gathered. So on top of that, you've got Games Workshop in the UK, and they're selling these miniatures, and they're selling Dungeons and Dragons and other games, and they're like, okay, well, we have all these spare miniatures. What do we do with them aside from play with them in Dungeons and Dragons? Because in Dungeons and Dragons, we only use a few miniatures at any given moment. And then they came with the idea, well, we could make a miniature wargaming system out of this. And that's the inception of the miniature game Warhammer, at least Warhammer Fantasy Battles, which then spiraled into 40k Rogue Trader, which is now 40k, and so on and so on. So we've come full circle from going from miniature game to role-playing game to miniature game, and then Games Workshop said, well, what if we had a role-playing game based in our Warhammer universe? And then you get Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing. And we have some plans to cover other role-playing games here in the future. Right now we want to focus on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So one more thing about the whole miniatures feeding into wargaming aspect of this hobby. And many of you may be familiar with Reaper Miniatures out there on the market. Reaper Miniatures also has their own miniature battle system for use with their minis. So I just figured we'd mention that too. So it's not uncommon for a miniature company to create miniature war games out of the miniatures that they sell for Dungeons & Dragons. So let's dig into this a little bit more. And taking a page from Sniper Whip here. This copy was owned by Kirk Ruff. So Kirk, wherever you're at, I hope you're doing well. So you got a lot. Here's one thing you'll notice about this old D&D book. There is artwork. It's a lot more sparse. The book isn't as stylized as the Wizard of the Coast ones, and there's a lot of tables. So as we're flipping through here, we'll see if we can find the elephant in the tome. You got your skill base, your skill ability scores and modifiers. You got races, standard fare there, classes, class restrictions. In older role-playing games, the rules were a lot more restrictive as to what races could be, what classes, and what type of things certain classes could do. So, I flipped through this book so much more. Here's some spells in the back. Just going to kind of flip through here. Oh, look at this. Get out of the glare here. The necromancer is sitting on a throne of bone. That's pretty cool. Backpack, talking about character death. There's another cool picture. So, I might as well talk about it while I'm looking for more artwork. And they do have some full page spreads like this lovely picture here. And we've got a glare. But, nah, that's a better shot of it there. what I'm trying to find is the rules for Thaco. And it's not actually an O at the end, it's a 0. And Thaco stands for 2-hit armor class 0. And it was a calculation that you had to do to see if you hit your target every time you threw an attack. Granted, the first time you have to do the calculation pretty much the first time for enemies. If they have the same armor class, well, it becomes pretty easy from there. But initially, me and my friends trying to figure this out, here we are, blew our minds. But they also have some pre-calculated Thaco table here, and this is what I'm talking about. And of course, it doesn't want to focus. There we go. And we got a cool picture of a giant down below. So I think that's enough of this one. So we'll move it off to the side here. And we'll look at the, again, I believe this was a reprint of the Player's Handbook from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So, and there's another reason why I decided to cover Advanced Dungeons & Dragons before any others, aside from not having any of the older books. And that is, you know this edition was special when they make a community episode about Dungeons & Dragons, and this is the edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the edition that they chose to pick to play in the episode. And of course, community was created and manned by such great talent as Dan Harmon and the Russo brothers. Russo brothers went on to do the Marvel films and some of the Avengers films, and of course Dan Harmon, his big claim to fame right now is Rick and Morty. He also did a D&D program called Harmon Quest, where he and his friends play D&D, much like Critical Role. We got some weapons there, so and we'll just kind of do a quick flip through here. Again, you got class and race, and you know what classes can do what weapons and equipment and spells. That's all pretty standard for these tomes of excellence. And so the Player's Handbook, for those of you that have never played Dungeons & Dragons before and curious, Player's Handbooks is pretty much all you need as a starting player, at least in theory, to get started and create your character and understand the rules of the game as a player. This is the Dungeon Master Guide, and the Dungeon Master Guide is for the person that runs the game, or the Dungeon Master, and gives them rules for how to create the world, how to interact with the characters, how to do a combat, and create a world for the characters to live in. And usually in these books they'll give you, there's a beholder, they'll give you some sample monsters you can play around with. Is that Paladin in Hell? It certainly looks like it. And for those in the know, Death Saves has a Paladin in Hell t-shirt that's actually pretty cool. It's a redone artwork of Paladin in Hell. And just as that particular picture was. Here we go. Here's a good picture. A cleric trying to turn a undead creature in a swamp. This is one of my favorite pictures in this book. Magical items. So, in the Dungeon Master Guides, you usually will find wondrous and magical items, relics, artifacts, fun stuff. And lastly, we have the Monster Manual. The Monster Manual is a tome of beasts and creatures that you can pit your player characters up against, or even have as allies occasionally. Certainly we've done games where we've had a monster from the Monster Manual become an ally to our player characters, and you can see there's great character artwork, the character's name, their stats, or the monster's name, their stats, artwork, variants sometimes of various types of creatures. I particularly like the dragon artwork in here, and of course the Draco Lich, and you got basic classes like dwarves, some pretty cool looking dwarves. You got drow, which are dark elves, your various types of giants, golems, leprechauns, living wall. We went too far, because we want to look for is the elusive, fearsome lich. Liches are fun, unless they're against me, and then I don't like them. But usually me and liches get along pretty well. But you get the idea. It's just more pictures and names of monsters and stats. And there's an old school owlbear or older school owlbear. All good fun. So that's pretty much it for the core rule books of Dungeons & Dragons, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And these are all, I love to pull these out from time to time as a Zuber Demon, and likes to look at the artwork and the rules and remind us of simpler, fonder times of playing the older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. And again, Patreon is live. Don't forget to click the Patreon link in below and sign up for a content tier to unlock bonus content. You'll still have access to the main content of the Wizard's Manse, the Lazy Miniature Painter for free. This is just to help grow the channel and access bonus content based on your level of donation. And we can unlock more stuff depending on how much community support we get. Again, also don't forget to again, Patreon links in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe down below, toll the bell for notifications below, share with your friends, and comment. That really helps me out and helps us grow our channel and our content. So thank you, we appreciate you, and we look forward to doing more of these as we continue to grow. And this is the Wizard's Manse. This is Ghoul Dratz, Necromancer Extraordinaire, signing off. We'll see you next time.